deaf black girl, Maya Ellis, fell to the ground with a bullet in her chest, fired by a cop who mistook her signing for gang signs. Her sketchbook scattered in the wind, stained in red. Now her father, Gabriel Stone, isn't coming just to grieve. He's arriving with the FBI to tear apart the lies that tried to bury her and to end every career built on that injustice. But when power and silence collide, who will the world choose to believe? Share this story if it shakes you. Let's step into it together. I was wiping down the last table by the window when I heard the kind of quiet that makes you look up, the late afternoon hush that falls over Rosefield's library steps when the sun is low and the kids have worn themselves out. The light turned everything the color of warm honey. Leaves ticked against the brick. Across the street, a girl in a pink hoodie came down the stairs with a backpack slung loose and her hands moving like she was catching music only she could hear. I knew her, Maya Ellis, 14, sweet kid. She signs her songs on the walk home in always the same route, library to bus stop to Maple to Fifth. Some days she comes in for lemonade and draws superheroes in a sketchbook thick as a Bible, black girls with hearing aids like silver comets, boys in wheelchairs with capes that look like drum beats. She never causes trouble. She just lives in her own rhythm. Her fingers shaped a phrase I'd learned to read by now: I'm going home. Not a flourish, not a shout, just the kind of soft promise kids make to themselves when the day's been long. Sun on her sleeves, a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. I remember thinking, good, get home safe, baby. That's when the patrol car rolled slow by the curb. 2 officers. I recognized one, Mason Klein, big shoulders, jaw set like everything was a dare. The other, Derek Walsh, the new guy who waves at regulars and tries not to overdo it. The car stopped. Doors open. The air changed. Klein Walsh said in that measured tone they teach you, "It's a kid." Klein didn't look at him. He looked at Maya's hands. "Stop!" he shouted across the hood, voice ricocheting off brick. Hands where I can see them. The words hit the steps like thrown glass. Maya kept signing because that's what she does, and because she didn't hear him. The angle of her head, the way she's always slightly turned to catch light on her cheeks. None of that changed. I saw confusion crease her brow, then smooth away. She shaped home again, slower this time, as if to make the world understand. I reached for my phone. Not because I wanted to, but because I've learned you have to. The screen lit my hand while my other palm pressed flat to the cafe door, ready to push through. On the sidewalk, a teenager on a bike stopped pedaling. A mother drew her toddler closer. The wind felt like it forgot how to blow. "Stop moving," Klein barked. He took 2 fast steps, pulled his gun like he was flipping a switch. Walsh flinched, not away from Maya, but toward the barrel like he might slap it down if he had a second more courage or a second less fear. "Jesus," Mason Walsh said, and now his voice wasn't trained. It was him. "She's a kid. She's throwing gang signs." Klein snapped. His eyes were wide in the way that looks like focus until you realize it's panic. "Hands up. Hands up." Maya's hands kept telling the same story. "I'm going home." There's a breath you take before it happens. It's not big. It's the kind of half sip of air you take when you're trying not to cry. That's the breath I took. Then Klein's finger moved. The shot didn't echo. It just landed hard, close, too real to be sound. Maya's body jerked back like the world yanked her by the shoulders. The sketchbook slid out of her backpack and slapped the steps. The elastic band snapped. Pages fanned into the air like startled birds. White paper, gray, pencil, bright sun, and then red blooming where the bullet went in a flower with no season. I shoved the door open so hard the bell jumped off its hook. "She's deaf," I heard myself shout, my voice climbing out of me before I could shape it. She was signing, "You racist bastard." My phone was already up. It was as automatic as the shot had been. The lens found Maya on the stairs, the officers, the empty space between them, where the right choice should have stood. In the frame, Walsh's mouth hung open. He said, "Jesus, Mason, she's just a kid," like he was trying to wake himself from a bad dream. "I gave commands," Klein said. His face had that tight, twitching focus of someone building a story faster than the truth can catch up. "Non-compliant. Gang signs." I saw what you saw," I yelled across the street, was a child speaking with her hands. Maya's cochlear implant had skittered across the concrete, a small curve of plastic and wire that looked almost delicate. It buzzed once faint, angry, lost, then went still. The sound it made to die is a sound I'll carry with me. The camera caught it, the tiny twitch, the way small things go quiet without ceremony. People were moving now. The teenager dropped his bike and ran. The mother screamed, then knelt, then froze when she realized she was in the line of men with guns. A man in a suit took a step, and then another, hands up, palms flashing pale. Somebody started to pray, and then stopped because they didn't know the words for this. I don't remember deciding to cross the street. I remember my shoes slapping the asphalt, the heat of the day still rising off it, my phone steady, because I've learned to hold it steady. I kept saying, "She's deaf," like the phrase could rewind time if I said it with enough breath. I wanted to gather the pages scattered around her superheroes with soft eyes and hearing aids like halos. But my feet wouldn't leave the ground because Walsh had his hands in the air, now too, toward Klein, toward the gun, toward whatever he was trying to stop from happening next. "Put the weapon down," Walsh said, low and urgent. "I'm secure," Klein snapped like he had to convince himself. He was breathing hard. His mouth kept moving, little fragments of policy and fear. Threat indicators, non-compliant, possible. Possible what? I shouted. Possible child, possible art, possible walk home. Maya's head tilted the way heads tilt when the body is deciding whether to fight or fold. Her fingers twitched, not a sign, not a plea, just the last static flicker of a message that didn't get to finish. Blood found the edge of her hoodie and crept along the seam. Sirens finally started up in the distance. Slow at first, then stacking on top of each other, a chorus in the wrong key. The crowd thickened without stepping closer. People held their breath like a single body. Somewhere behind me, a car door slammed and someone said, "Call it in," and someone else said, "It's already in," and none of it matched the way time was actually moving. Hands where I can see them. Klein shouted again to a girl whose hands had spoken more truth in 30 seconds than his mouth had in 30 years. And that was the split in the afternoon, the point where we stopped being a town and started being a witness. I knelt without meaning to. The camera kept rolling. I remember the angle, the edge of the library's brick, the first page of the sketchbook, a drawing of a black girl flying with hearing aids that looked like small moons. Her smile on the page had the kind of courage kids are born believing they'll always have. I set my free hand on the paper to keep it from blowing away. It left a print I didn't want to leave because my palms were sweating and the page was clean, and for a second I hated myself for touching something pure with hands that had just filmed a child's blood. Mason Walsh said quieter now, just between the two of them, like he was trying to talk to the part of Klein that had ever been human. "Look at me. Look at me." Klein didn't. He was staring at the world he'd made in 10 seconds and could not unmake. "Maya." I said her name like it was a rope I could throw. "Honey, I'm here." Her eyes flicked once. I don't think she saw me. I think she felt the shape of her name the way a person feels the shape of their own house in the dark. Her lips parted. No sound. The paramedics arrived in a rush of wheels and clipped voices. 14, GSW to chest. Pressure now. One of them pressed gauze that went red faster than his hands could move. Another pulled a line like he was threading a needle mid-earthquake. A woman in scrubs yelled for room, and the crowd did the only thing crowds know how to do when they want to help and can't. They stepped back and then back again, like distance could pay a debt. Walsh's radio hissed and spit. Klein kept talking to a place only he could see. "Non-compliant," he said like it was a prayer. "Non-compliant." I realized my hand was shaking. Not the one with the phone, the other one, the hand on the drawing. I lifted it, and the paper tried to go with me, clinging from the sweat. I pressed it back down gently, like putting a blanket over a child who's finally fallen asleep. Behind the sirens, another sound started, low, ugly building. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't words. It was the sound a town makes when it understands something unforgivable has happened, and there's no way to pretend it didn't. People didn't surge. They settled. That's worse. We settle when we're getting ready to hold our ground. Someone whispered, "She's so small." Someone else said, "Record everything." A third voice, shaky but clear, said name and badge. And I swung my phone to catch the metal on Klein's chest, the line of his jaw, the way Walsh's shoulders looked like they were carrying something that would hurt for the rest of his life. The paramedics lifted Maya onto the gurney. Her arms slid, and for a second, her fingers hung off the side like they were still trying to finish the sentence she'd started. I reached without thinking and tucked her hand back onto the sheet. It was warm. That detail matters. People will tell you the world goes cold at moments like this. Parts of it do. But in the living part, the human part fights to stay. They pushed her toward the ambulance. The doors opened like the mouth of a thing that eats time. One of the medics shouted vitals. The other said, move, and we moved. The door slammed. The siren rose. They left. Klein finally lowered his gun. Walsh lowered his hands. I lowered my phone and then raised it again because this wasn't over. It couldn't be over, not with a child's sketchbook bleeding against stone and a town standing still like a held breath. If you ask me what I remember most, it isn't the shot. It's the moment after when silence tried to settle in like dust and failed because we wouldn't let it. Because there are some afternoons a place decides what kind of place it's going to be. And Rosefield, whether it knew it or not, had just made its choice. I remember the way that room in D.C. hummed with the low drone of recycled air and fluorescent light. Gabriel Stone was mid-sentence leaning over a thick folder of threat assessments when something on his wrist broke the rhythm. A tiny tremor, a vibration no one else heard. Then a red pulse. Ivory key. You could see the life drain out of his face in a single breath. He didn't ask what it meant. He already knew. That signal was only supposed to trigger if his daughter's implant registered trauma, a system he swore he'd never need. The director of the division, Vernon Parker, noticed the shift. Stone, his brow furrowed like he already disliked the answer. Gabriel closed the file, straightened his jacket, and spoke with a finality that made the room go still. Family emergency, non-negotiable. A junior officer tapped his tablet, eyes darting up. Approved emergency air asset, code 7F Delta. Go. The words unlocked something. Without another sound, Gabriel turned and walked out. Not rushed, not panicked, just a man who had already decided what mattered. While his footsteps faded down a marble hallway miles away in Rosefield Regional Hospital, chaos was blooming. Female 14, the paramedic barked as they wheeled the gurney in. GSW to chest, deaf. Dr. Nora Whitfield snapped on gloves, trying not to let her hands tremble. She pressed gauze against a wound too large for a child that small. Too young, she muttered almost under her breath, but every nurse within earshot heard it. They all did. The girl's lips were pale, her breath shallow. Machines beeped, blood soaked through faster than the staff could replace the pads. And somewhere in that sterile room, everyone sensed they weren't just treating an injury, they were touching the edges of something bigger. Heavier, more dangerous. Back at the precinct, Chief Randall Pike read the first scrambled report. His face didn't show anger or grief, just calculation. She wasn't compliant, he said flatly. That's the story. A sergeant hesitated. But Chief, seal the logs, Pike snapped. No statements. Not one word leaves this building unless I clear it. We do not lose control of the narrative. That was the moment the cover-up began, and everyone in that office knew it. Meanwhile, Gabriel was already making calls as the government jet fired its engines. He didn't bother with pleasantries. Rhea, he said when the line connected. A woman's voice, crisp, sharp, answered. I'm here. Rhea Park, forensic tech wizard, the kind who could turn raw code into testimony that stood up in court. Owen, Gabriel said on the next line. Ready came the reply, deep and steady. Owen Miles, fieldman, former Marine, the sort of presence you wanted at your back when the world tilted sideways. Georgia. Now, Gabriel ordered. Neither asked why. They didn't need to. By the time his shoes hit the tarmac, both were already boarding with him. The jet lifted under cloud cover, no markings, no delay, just a blur of gray against the dusk. Inside, the three sat in silence for long minutes, the kind of silence that isn't empty but thick with thought. Rhea finally broke it. You think it's Maya? Gabriel's jaw tightened. He didn't look up. It's Maya. No one asked how he knew. A father doesn't need evidence when the alarm wired to his child's life is screaming red on his wrist. Out the window, Washington shrank behind them. Ahead lay Georgia and a town about to learn what happens when power pulls the trigger on innocence. Gabriel finally spoke, his voice low, but sharp enough to cut steel. Within 48 hours, one phone call and one email will end 3 careers. He didn't say whose. He didn't need to. The words hung in the cabin like prophecy, and for the first time that night, even the engine sounded quieter, as if they were listening too. The hospital doors didn't swing for Gabriel Stone. He came in through the service corridor past laundry carts and mop buckets the way men who've lived too long in the shadows prefer to move. Owen walked 2 paces ahead, his hand brushing the edge of his jacket every time someone in scrubs glanced up. He wasn't just clearing hallways, he was measuring threat, building a wall between Gabriel and the world. Rhea had her laptop open before they'd even reached the elevators. The glow lit her face like a lantern, green code spilling fast. "City feeds are porous," she murmured, fingers moving. "Traffic cams, hospital cams. They'll try to erase the gaps later. We'll catch it now." The elevator bell chimed. The doors slid back to reveal a woman in a white coat, her hair pulled into a knot that had lost its neatness hours ago. "Stuttered Nora Whitfield." She stepped forward, paused when her eyes met Gabriel's. "You're Gabriel Stone." The words carried weight, half recognition, half warning. Her hands trembled around the clipboard. "I've heard the name." Gabriel didn't answer with pride or apology, just a small nod. "I need your consent as her guardian to brief you on her condition," she said, voice tight but steady. He took the pen, signed without hesitation. The paper shook in her hands. HIPAA was satisfied, but Nora's eyes told a different story. This wasn't paperwork anymore. It was life balanced on a thread. They moved down the corridor. Behind a thick pane of glass, Maya lay on a table under too many lights. Her chest rose shallow, each rise a gamble, each fall a dare. Machines beeped with a rhythm that sounded more like a question than an answer. Gabriel stood so close to the glass, his knuckles touched it. He didn't blink. His hand tightened until the veins showed, as if holding that glass together might hold his daughter inside it. Behind him, Walsh sat slumped in a plastic chair along the hallway wall. His uniform looked heavier than his body could carry. He pressed his palms over his face, rocking slightly. I heard him whisper, ragged like a prayer leaking through cracked stone. She didn't even hear us. "God forgive me." It wasn't loud, but in the sterile hush of the hospital, every syllable traveled. You could feel the guilt crawling out of him, and for the first time, it was clear this man wasn't just a witness. He was tearing apart inside, caught between badge and conscience. Tanya Reed arrived, still in her cafe apron, phone clutched in her hand like a weapon sharper than any blade. She didn't waste words. She pressed the screen into Gabriel's palm. "This is the raw video. I've got it clouded, mirrored, backed up. But you'll want your own." Gabriel transferred it, his fingers moving with the calm precision of someone who knows the value of evidence. 3 copies, 3 secure drives. He muttered almost to himself, "If they bury it once, we'll dig it up 3 times. It wasn't bravado, it was strategy. The kind you make when you already know the enemy will try to rewrite the past before the ink is dry. The air around us carried no comfort. Every sound was sharpened by tension. The squeak of nurses' shoes, the metallic clatter of a tray, the hiss of oxygen, the muffled sob of someone too far down the hall to see. Hospitals are supposed to blink lights, monitors eyes of tired staff. But this one felt unblinking, a place holding its breath, waiting to see if a child's pulse would win the argument against a bullet. And through the glass, Gabriel kept watching, as if the sheer force of his gaze might keep her tethered to this world. I remember how the hospital lights seemed to buzz louder that night, as if the building itself knew a storm was brewing inside. Rhea sat with her laptop balanced on her knees, the glow washing her face pale. Her fingers barely touched the keys, yet the screen filled with lines of code, unraveling like a confession. "Found it," she whispered. Not triumph, more like dread. Aegis metrics, sentinel risk grid. Gabriel leaned over, his shadow falling across the screen. The file wasn't a clean report. It was messy, raw, hidden in a corner of the system where no civilian was supposed to wander. And there it was, a timestamp, an entry, a judgment rendered by an algorithm. Maya's last few hand movements, those simple signs for "I'm going home," had been tagged in bright red letters, "High threat." For a long beat, no one spoke. The only sound was the hiss of air vents and the beeping monitors echoing down the hall. Gabriel's hand flexed once, then stilled. His eyes stayed on that word until it seemed to burn. Rhea scrolled further. It's not just her. She tapped another file open and another, each one a child. Names blurred into case numbers. Ages 8, 10, 12. Notes beside them, ASL gesture misclassified. Autistic stimming flagged. Cerebral palsy gait suspicious. Page after page, a system built to turn difference into danger. I could see Gabriel's shoulders set like stone. He wasn't just looking at data. He was watching a net thrown over every child who ever moved in ways the world didn't understand. "They didn't just shoot my daughter," he said quietly, voice rough as gravel. "They built a system to make it inevitable." Rhea swallowed, clicked again. An email popped onto the screen, stripped of Seal's raw text with a signature at the bottom. Mayor Celia Grant, emergency protocol clause invoked, Sentinel deployment authorized. No council vote, no oversight, just one pen stroke pushing an untested machine into every street corner. That line sat heavy in the air, a mayor's name tied directly to the red word on Maya's file. And then another discovery, buried deeper, a sealed record. Officer Mason Klein, 2 years back. A teenage boy flagged erratic. He wasn't erratic. He was autistic, walking home with headphones too loud. Klein had drawn his weapon then too. The report never reached daylight. Stamped sealed. Walsh, who'd been sitting in the shadows like he wanted to disappear, muttered, "I heard rumors. I thought maybe they were just stories." His face was pale, his jaw clenched so hard it shook. Gabriel didn't answer him. He was still staring at the screen, but his voice carried to every corner of that hallway. "This isn't a mistake. It's policy dressed up as technology, and it's hunting our children." For the first time that night, you could feel the ground shift. It wasn't just about Maya anymore. It was about a machine built to criminalize silence, to target difference, to give men like Klein the excuse they needed. And standing there in that unblinking hospital with beeps and footsteps echoing off tile, everyone knew the bullet that tore through Maya's chest had been fired long before Klein pulled the trigger. It had been chambered by signatures, by sealed reports, by a grid that called innocence a threat. That was the moment the room grew colder. Because the fight ahead wasn't against one man, it was against an entire system that believed it was safer to shoot than to understand. I can still see that kitchen like it was yesterday, the little square room where sunlight spilled across chipped tile and the smell of cinnamon clung to the curtains. Maya sat on a stool too tall for her legs, swinging her feet against the rungs, while her mother Marisol leaned over the counter with flour on her cheek. They weren't talking in voices. They were singing with their hands. Marisol lifted her daughter's wrists, gently guiding the shapes. Her palms were steady, her smile soft, as if she was passing down a language older than sound itself. Maya laughed without a sound, her shoulders shaking, and signed the next line back at her mother. A song neither of them ever needed ears to hear. That's how they spoke, love, clear, wordless, full. The memory faded like steam off a kettle, and in its place came the harsh light of the ICU. Beeping monitors, the hiss of oxygen, nurses whispering codes in quick syllables. Maya lay small against white sheets, her skin too pale under the glare. Then a flicker. Her eyelids trembled. Her hand twitched against the sheet. Gabriel leaned so close his breath fogged the glass. Her fingers searched for something, but she was too weak. A nurse slid her sketchbook onto the bed, the corners still spotted with dried blood from the library steps. Maya's hand shook as she gripped a pencil. Slowly, painfully, she scrawled 3 words across the page, the letters jagged but unbroken. Not a weapon. The pencil slipped from her fingers. Her arm fell back. The words stayed. Gabriel stepped inside his shadow, falling over the sketchbook. He lifted the page as though it were scripture. Blood had smudged one corner, staining the paper into a mark that looked like a seal. His eyes blurred, but his voice was steady low like a vow carved in stone. "You are my hero." Outside, the town was gathering. Not with chants, not with rage, with silence. Candles flickered on the library steps, flames bowing in the night air. Mothers held children close. Teenagers clasped hands. And then slowly, as though they'd rehearsed it their whole lives, people raised their palms into the air, or fingers spread. The sign for love. No speeches, no slogans. Just a sea of hands lifted in the glow of candlelight. That silence traveled farther than any shout. Phones recorded it, screens carried it. And soon the word spread, "By Justice Maya." Not a protest born of noise, but of stillness, an entire community speaking the same language without sound. In that moment, there was no line between father and daughter, no gap between family and strangers. Maya's message, her father's vow, the crowd's response, they braided together. A child who drew heroes had become one, and through their silence the world began to listen. The hallway outside the ICU felt like it belonged to another world. Bright lights overhead, but shadows stretching long across the linoleum, swallowing every sound. Nurses moved fast, their shoes squeaking, but you could feel it in their eyes. They were watching the standoff forming in the middle of their hospital. Gabriel Stone stood anchored, one hand clutching his daughter's sketchbook, the smear of blood still fresh on its cover. Across from him, Officer Mason Klein froze. His jaw trembled, his eyes darting like a man cornered by his own choices. Gabriel's voice was steady but sharp enough to cut glass. You aimed at a child speaking her language. Klein's throat worked his words, spilling out like excuses he'd rehearsed. Protocol. She looked dangerous. Gabriel didn't blink. From his coat pocket, he pulled a device, tapped the screen. The grainy body cam footage lit up between them. Everyone could see it, Maya standing on the library steps, her hands moving gently through the air. Clear as daylight. I'm going home. The clip played once, then again. The monitors behind the ICU doors seemed to hold their beep as though the building itself was listening. Klein stammered gang signs. It matched indicators, but the words died in his mouth. Chief Randall Pike appeared, his presence heavy as his shoes pounding against the tile. His voice was cold, laced with authority. Stone, get out. This is police business. From the far wall, Owen Miles stepped forward, calm as stone. He lifted his phone, the screen glowing. Not anymore, Chief. Evidence is already uploaded, mirrored, and clouded. You can't erase what the world's already seen. For the first time, Pike's mask cracked. Just a flicker, but enough to show fear. Gabriel turned then, eyes landing on Derek Walsh. The younger officer sat slumped on a plastic chair, his face pale, uniform hanging heavy on his frame. His lips moved like a man praying under his breath. Gabriel's voice dropped low, rough, but unshakable. Tell the truth. For her. For yourself. Walsh looked up, eyes bloodshot, wet with guilt. His voice cracked as it broke free. She couldn't hear a word. She never even knew. The sentence hung there, shaking the air. His shoulders caved, his hands covering his face, but the truth was out, raw and undeniable. The nurses nearby stopped moving. One young orderly bit her lip until it bled, her eyes shining. A patient in a wheelchair at the end of the hall gripped the arms tight, whispering, Dear God. Even in silence, the whole corridor seemed to lean toward Walsh's words. Pike stormed forward, gripping Walsh's arm, yanking him aside like a father scolding a child. His voice was a venomous growl, but it carried through the sterile space. You testify you're finished, blacklisted. No badge, no job, no future. You'll be nothing. Walsh's body shook, his knees weak, but his eyes told a different story. Beneath the fear, a spark had been lit. He looked at Pike not like a superior anymore, but like a man he would one day defy. Gabriel saw it. He didn't press, didn't speak. He simply closed the sketchbook in his hand, the pages smearing red where his fingers pressed. He turned his back on Pike, inclined, his stride steady, deliberate, like a man already walking toward the next battlefield. The nurses parted as he passed, their faces pale, their silence louder than any siren. Even Owen, usually unreadable, clenched his jaw as if holding back the storm he wanted to unleash. At the far end of the corridor, Gabriel paused for only a moment, the sketchbook tight in his grip. The crimson stain on the cover gleamed under the light, a reminder of what had already been taken and what was still left to fight for. This was no longer just a grieving father standing in a hospital hallway. This was a man armed with truth, with evidence, with resolve. And for the first time, Mason Klein and Randall Pike realized the shot at the library had awakened something far more dangerous than they could ever control. Gabriel walked on silent, but his silence carried a promise. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The hospital had quieted for the night, but the silence wasn't peace. It was the kind that comes before a storm. In a side office, Rhea sat with her laptop, her face lit by lines of code and blocks of logs she had pulled from half a dozen systems. Her voice was clipped, focused. There's no 911 call, she said. Not from a civilian, not even anonymous. Radio traffic doesn't start until after the first shot. She tapped another key. And look here. She zoomed in on a gap in the logs, a 2-minute silence where there should have been chatter. Orders didn't come from dispatch. They came from Pike's office. Rhea leaned back, the glow of the screen washing her face thin. "This isn't a bad night," she said quietly. "It's a design choice." Gabriel didn't answer, but the room felt smaller. Chain of command wasn't supposed to bypass the people who pick up the phone and say, "What's your emergency?" "Export the raw logs," he said. "Hash them. Timestamp everything. If they try to backfill, I want the gaps to scream." Rhea nodded, fingers already moving. "Chain of custody starts now." It wasn't loud, but you could hear the turn from grief to procedure, from shock to proof. Then Rhea played a file she'd almost missed, a clipped, sterile recording. Mayor Celia Grant's voice, clear and cold, speaking with someone from Aegis Metrics. "We cannot introduce response latency due to atypical signaling," she said. "The model prioritizes officer safety." That's the line. Rhea paused the audio on the word latency. "You hear how she says it?" Gabriel heard. Not anger, not even contempt, just policy. "Officer safety is real," Rhea added, voice tight. But somewhere in that sentence, the kids disappeared. Gabriel's jaw flexed once. They didn't disappear. They were removed. The distinction mattered. In court, it would matter more. Words like latency and prioritize sounded clean on paper. In a hospital hallway, they sounded like distance from a bleeding child. Later that night, leaving the hospital, the danger showed itself. A van with no markings slid out from a side street and tucked itself 2 cars behind. At first, it looked ordinary, then deliberate. Owen caught it in the rearview mirror. His voice was flat. "We've got company." The van edged closer. Gabriel stayed quiet, but his hand moved toward the glove box where his own tools waited. Rhea closed her laptop, eyes sharp. Owen didn't wait. He turned hard into a side street, then another, pulling them fast into an alley with brick walls on both sides. The van followed until Owen spun the wheel, braked hard, and boxed it against a chain-link fence. Before the men inside could react, a laser sight painted across their windshield, Owen's weapon steady in his hands. "Step out," he barked. The van doors cracked open, then slammed shut again. Whoever they were, they weren't ready to face him. Tires screeched, metal scraped the fence, and the van tore backward down the street, disappearing into the dark. Owen kept his sight steady a beat longer than necessary, then lowered the weapon and scanned the alley. "They weren't here to talk," he said. "Or to think," Rhea muttered, already thumbing through the plate return. Owen exhaled through his nose, a soldier's patience settling over him. "People make sloppier mistakes when they're shrewd. We'll use that." Gabriel watched the darkness at the alley mouth. "Fear is a kind of footprint," he said. "It always leaves a trace." Rhea held up her phone. "Plate's dirty, but the registration bounces to a security subcontractor." She scrolled, then showed the screen. "Signed to Aegis. Same contract Pike approved." Across town, in a dim locker room, Derek Walsh sat alone on a bench when his phone buzzed. "Administrative leave pending review." No greeting, no signature, just a lid snapping shut. He stared at the screen, then at his reflection in a dented metal door. Somewhere beneath the fear, something settled. If they were going to end him for telling the truth, he might as well tell all of it. Back at the hospital, Gabriel drafted a single message attaching every file Rhea had pulled, the license trace, the log gaps, the mayor's recording. It went to a contact at the bureau, stamped urgent. "Preservation and warrant," he said. "Aegis servers. Pike's phone. Lock it all before they wipe it." The reply came minutes later. "Receipt log, judge on call notified. Your preservation in motion." By dawn, affidavits would be on a desk with a seal, and the clock would start on Aegis and Pike. Gabriel finally exhaled. The net wasn't just around him anymore, it was around them. And this time it would hold. The courthouse lights burned long past midnight, the kind of glow that makes stone walls look older and colder than they are. This wasn't a trial, at least not yet. It was an emergency hearing called on short notice, the kind meant for paper arguments and quick signatures. But the air inside that room felt heavier, as if everyone knew history was pressing against the doors. Judge Miriam Holt presided from the bench, silver hair pinned back, eyes sharp but weary. She adjusted her glasses, glancing at the petition in front of her. Temporary restraining order and data preservation motion. City requests all records sealed pending review. The city attorney stood stiff in a gray suit. "Your Honor, disclosure could compromise officer safety and ongoing operations. We ask that the material remain confidential." Gabriel rose slowly. He wasn't a lawyer, but his presence carried weight more than words. "With respect, Your Honor," he said, voice steady but iron. "Underneath secrecy is how this began. A child lies in that hospital because silence was chosen over truth. If these files are sealed, the cover-up wins." The room stirred, restless murmurs swelling until Holt tapped her gavel once, not harsh, just enough to remind everyone she was still the anchor here. "I will hear witnesses," she said. From the back, a figure stood. Derek Walsh. His uniform was gone, replaced by a plain shirt, sleeves rolled, sweat dark at the collar. His voice trembled at first, but he didn't sit back down. She never heard, he said, eyes fixed on the judge. She wasn't a threat. The silence afterward felt like glass cracking. Everyone knew he'd been warned, threatened, and yet here he was. His confession cut through the stale air like fresh wind. Rhea Park stepped forward, next laptop under her arm. She moved to the witness table, her hands tight around the device as though it might slip away. "I've reviewed the Sentinel system logs," she began. "The problem isn't miscalculation, it's omission." She brought up a screen for the court to see. Charts, spreadsheets, QA notes. The algorithm's training data contained no American Sign Language. None. Every hand gesture it encountered was weighted towards suspicion. To Sentinel's silence was always a threat. The city attorney objected. Judge Holt waved him down. Rhea's breast shook, but her voice sharpened. "We ran a demonstration this afternoon. A volunteer signed the word love." She tapped a key and in the screen displayed the alert, high-risk possible aggression. Gasps rippled through the room. Holt leaned back, eyes narrowing. Rhea swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "I once thought machines couldn't hate. Today I learned they can." No one moved for several heartbeats. Then the FBI agent in the corner stood carrying a box of files. He set it on the table with a thud. "Your Honor, recovered from Chief Pike's phone and Mayor Grant's email server, internal correspondence with Aegis Metrics, and financial records payments to private contractors tied to surveillance operations." He flipped a folder open, invoices signed within the last 30 days. The paper trail was undeniable. Holt's gaze lingered over the stack, her expression unreadable. Then the sound of wheels broke the silence. A side door opened, and a nurse pushed a wheelchair into the courtroom. Maya Ellis, pale but upright, her hands trembling against the blanket. The crowd shifted, rising to their feet almost unconsciously. Maya's father started forward, but stopped, letting her claim the moment. Her fingers were too weak to sign, so she held a whiteboard across her lap. 3 words written in thick black marker: "I will not die in silence." The message faced the bench, the city attorney, the entire room. The candles from the vigil outside still glowed faintly through the tall windows, their reflection flickering against the glass. For a long moment, no one breathed. No one coughed. Even the judge's pen hovered still above the page. It was the kind of silence that didn't just fill a courtroom. It filled a country. By morning, the courthouse felt different, like a room that had learned a hard truth and decided to live with it. Judge Miriam Holt came back to the bench with a thin stack of papers and a voice that didn't waver. She granted the temporary restraining order, preserved the data, and then went further than anyone expected. "The motion to seal is denied," she said. "Records will be unsealed with narrow redactions for personal identifiers." The court refers the shooting of Maya Ellis to the district attorney for criminal charging, consideration of Officer Mason Klein, and requests immediate review of potential misconduct by Chief Randall Pike and Mayor Celia Grant by the State Attorney General. Contracts with Aegis Metrics are suspended pending audit. Her gavel didn't slam, it landed, and that was enough. What happened next didn't feel like theater. It felt like accountability finally remembered its part. Outside the precinct, cameras gathered in a semicircle. Mason Klein stood stiff as a board while Internal Affairs read the words into the wind. He didn't argue. He didn't look up. A hand reached in, unclipped his badge, and took his gun, the leather creaking as the holster strap slid free. For a second, his chest looked smaller, like a wall had been pulled from a house and the weather got in. Down the hall in a different building, a clerk posted a notice on a door that never liked being open: disciplinary. Inside, Chief Randall Pike stood at parade rest while a deputy city manager read the suspension letter aloud. It was not dramatic. It was bureaucratic, the way weathered paper is bureaucratic. Edges soft ink, plain, impact heavy. Pike stared past the reader as if the wall might blink first. It didn't. When the reader finished, the silence in the room had the color of resignation. On the steps of City Hall, Mayor Celia Grant faced the microphone she used to lean toward. Now she leaned away. "Effective immediately, am resigning the office of mayor," she said, hands folded tight like she was keeping something from shaking loose. She offered phrases about process and good faith and the burden of leadership, but none of them could compete with the single image that had been threaded into every newscast overnight: a child in a wheelchair holding up a board that read, "I will not die in silence." When the questions came, Grant lowered her head, turned and walked down the steps without touching the rail. At Aegis Metrics, the reckoning arrived as an email nobody wanted to write, but everybody had expected since midnight. Subject: contract suspension. Immediate. The message was dry as dust audits cooperation interim measures. But someone screenshotted the footer where the company's stock ticker lived. In the corner of the image, the line bent south like a knee giving out. Names on paper became faces on screens, each one framed by consequences that finally had weight. News doesn't travel in a straight line. It rolls through living rooms and waiting rooms and break rooms, through church halls, in PTA meetings, and barbershops. In Rosefield, it rolled back to the hospital. Derek Walsh walked the long corridor without a uniform, carrying a box that held the life he used to understand: a mug, a notebook, a photo of a baseball team. He stopped outside Maya's room and looked through the glass. Dr. Nora Whitfield stepped aside. "2 minutes," she said softly. Walsh went in with his shoulders rounded, as if trying to take up less space. Maya slept the steady rise and fall of her breathing, a new kind of hymn. Gabriel stood at the foot of the bed, neither welcoming nor blocking, just bearing witness. Walsh cleared his throat, but the words didn't need volume to count. "I should have stopped him," he said. "I'm sorry." He didn't wait for forgiveness. He didn't ask for it. He set the box down on the chair and left with his hands empty. Out in the hall, he paused, pressed his palm flat against cool glass, and walked on. Sometimes the only proof a man changes is the way he no longer fits the shape of his mistakes. By late afternoon, Gabriel faced a different kind of microphone. Not at the courthouse, not at City Hall. In a community center room that smelled faintly of coffee and floor wax, he introduced something he called the Stone Protocol. No fanfare, just clear words, steady tone. "It's a public platform," he said, "where families, teachers, and clinicians can report wrongful profiling and misflagging in real time. Every submission is time-stamped, hashed, and mirrored. You can upload video notes from an IEP meeting, a body cam clip, a school incident report. We keep a chain of custody so truth doesn't get lost between hands." Behind him, a screen showed a simple interface, big buttons, plain language, no maze. Civil rights groups had already signed on lawyers who knew how to pull a thread until the whole sweater unraveled, disability advocates who understood that the first barrier is often disbelief, faith leaders who were tired of eulogies and ready for instructions. A pediatrician from 3 towns over stood to ask about privacy. A teacher wanted to know how quickly a red flag could be turned into a training. A grandfather held up a printed photo of a boy who flapped his hands when he was excited and asked, "Will this help?" Someone like my Marcus Gabriel nodded once. "It will help us help each other," he said. "That's the point." The platform went live at 5:13 p.m. The first report arrived at 5:19. A school hall camera in another county where a girl signed bathroom and got detention for non-compliance. Then a street cam where a boy with cerebral palsy paused at a crosswalk too long and triggered a loitering alert. Then a mother uploaded a letter she'd written a year ago that nobody answered. The map began to glow not with sirens, but with stories. By evening, the protocol wasn't numbers on a dashboard. It was rooms filling up. Union halls setting up folding chairs. Church basements laying out cookies next to stacks of Know Your Rights pamphlets. A librarian taping a new poster inside the door, ASL class enrollment here. A police captain in a neighboring county emailing his training sergeant 2 words. Start over. The movement didn't look like a march. It looked like people deciding to be better neighbors with receipts. Through it all, Gabriel stayed mostly off camera. When he did speak, he chose small rooms and steady phrases. "Language is not a threat," he said once, quiet enough that the microphones had to lean in. "Silence is," he says. It wasn't a slogan for him. It was a calibration, a way to reset instruments that had drifted. Night fell the way it does after long days, soft on the edges, heavy in the middle. On the library steps, the candles had burned down to nubs and been replaced by new ones. In the hospital, the monitors hummed their tired lullaby. In 1,000 living rooms, faces leaned toward the glow and learned the names that had always been there: Klein, Pike, Grant, Aegis, not as rumors, as records. And in a small room where the blinds were drawn half-closed against the evening, a father closed his daughter's sketchbook and laid it beside her bed like a shield. Tomorrow would bring cameras and questions and the next hard thing. But tonight there was room for a different kind of news: that the ark had moved an inch, that strangers had found each other, that a web once used to ensnare might yet be repurposed to protect. The story wasn't over. It was taking root. And somewhere between the courthouse and the hospital, between names on paper and faces on screens, you could feel the country preparing itself to listen to the children it had spent too long misreading. 1 week later, the steps of the Rosefield Library looked different. No crime tape, no sirens, just children, rows of them, gathered in wheelchairs with hearing aids, with bright eyes that didn't always look straight ahead, but always saw more than the world gave them credit for. Maya sat at the center in her wheelchair, pale but upright, wrapped in a soft jacket, her hands lifted slowly, trembling but sure. Around her, dozens of children followed their fingers, shaping the same words in the same rhythm. "We are not your glitch in the system." The phrase rippled through the crowd like a wave, not in sound but in motion. Hands flashing, palms, opening fingers, cutting the air like banners. Parents cried softly behind cameras. Activists held their breaths, and strangers on sidewalks paused to watch. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with resistance, with defiance, with the unshakable truth that these children existed beyond labels, beyond algorithms. Behind Maya stood Gabriel Stone. His presence was quiet, steady, but when he spoke, his voice carried. "Language is not a threat," he said, repeating the words he had carried through courtrooms and sleepless nights. Then softer, so the wind seemed to hold it for him, "Silence is." Phones streamed the moment live. Tanya Reid, still wearing her cafe apron like a badge of witness, angled her phone toward a mural freshly painted across the library wall. The image stretched high, Maya drawn larger than life, rising from her chair, arms spread wide. Her hands glowed with light paper cranes lifting around her like a storm of fragile wings. Tanya's voice shook as she narrated, "She always drew heroes, now she is one." In the crowd, Dr. Nora Whitfield pressed a hand against her mouth, her eyes glassy. She wasn't just seeing a patient anymore. She was seeing a child who had refused to vanish, who had written her truth in blood and pencil and still managed to breathe it back into the world. Not far away, Derek Walsh pushed through the crowd. He wore no badge, no uniform, just a shirt and a face lined by regret. He knelt by the steps and placed a single white flower against the candles. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence now was different. It was penance, not fear. Owen Miles stood a step behind Gabriel, hands folded, jaw tight. His voice reached Gabriel's ear, low and rough. "My daughter signs good night," he said, "every evening. I won't let a machine call that a threat." The words weren't for the crowd, but for himself, a promise laid down like stone. And then Maya did something no one expected. She reached into her lap, pulled out her sketchbook, the same one stained and torn, but now filled with new blank pages. She turned to the little girl beside her, no older than 8, with bright eyes and nervous fingers. Maya pressed the sketchbook into her hands. Her lips shaped the words, and her fingers signed slow but clear. "Draw yourself loud." The girl clutched the book as if it were a crown. Around her, the other children lifted their hands again, not just repeating Maya's words this time, but signing new ones, clumsy, brave, imperfect, loud. The cameras caught it. The nation saw it. But in that moment, standing on those steps, it didn't feel like a broadcast. It felt like a beginning. The candles flickered. The mural glowed in fading light. And somewhere between the silence and the signing, between fathers and daughters, between apology and hope, you could feel the ground shift underfoot. It wasn't just Maya's story anymore. It belonged to them all. And that brings us to the end of this story. At its heart, it's not only about injustice, it's about courage, community, and the power of refusing to stay silent. Maya's voice wasn't carried by sound, but by love, resilience, and the hands that spoke louder than fear. Her story reminds us that language is never a threat, but ignoring it always is. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful stories that shine a light on truth, dignity, and hope. Your support means the world. It's what gives our team the strength to keep creating meaningful content that connects us all. Remember, here at Mr. Max Stories, every story carries a heartbeat, and together we make sure it's never forgotten.